Okay, so why don't we go ahead? Katie, are you ready to present? And then we'll come back to Akish.
Sure,
Okay,
absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to present to you all today. My name is Katie Irvin, and I am the Associate Vice President of Academic Operations at Park University here in Kansas City. My background, just real quick before I jump into the presentation. And first of all, if everyone can mute, that would be super helpful so there's not so much background. So I have 14 years of corporate HR experience, and then moved over into higher education administration about 9 years ago. My master's is in human resources development, and then my doctorate is in adult education and leadership. So have a lot of years of training and development and supporting adult learning. So you should be able to see my slides. If for some reason you can, if someone will just pop in and say, no, we can't see it. But first of all, a little bit of why innovation is so important in learning. As I like to say, we are living in a YouTube generation. People can, gain access to information really, really quickly. And so whether we're in the workplace or in a formal classroom or really anywhere, I mean, we're constantly picking up our phone and looking something up, or we're talking to our devices when we say, hey, I'm not going to say her name because she's here in the room with me. And when I say her name, she'll speak up. But, we can reach out to technology all around us to get information. And that's why it's really important when we're talking about training, development, or formal learning that we're really innovative in how we teach. This is an interesting statistic, and as a mom of teenagers, I will say that this is really true. The average attention span of a human being is 8 seconds, which a goldfish is 9 seconds. So we're losing attention span. Everything's going on around us, and so we've got to really make sure that when we're doing our training and development, that we're really capturing people's attention and really bringing them in. So a couple of things to think about when you're creating your teaching and learning is, first of all, what are you trying to teach? What are the objectives? Why are we doing this training? And I think the why we're doing the training is so important. A quick story, I used to be the HR director at a hotel, and the food and beverage director came to me and said, hey, Katie, we need to do some customer service training for our servers. And I said, why? I love it. Yes, I'm in. But what do we need? Why are we doing it? And he said, well, one of our servers yelled at a customer over lunch. And I said, well, what did they yell about? Well, the customer was upset because it took way too long to get the hamburger from the kitchen. It took about 30 minutes. And I'm like, why did that take so long? Well, the printer's broken and the kitchen didn't know about it until the server went back. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I'll do training because I love to do training and development, but truly let's fix the problem. Doing training and putting workshops into place are not going to fix the root of the problem if the problem is an operational based problem. So I always like to ask that question, why are we doing this training? Who's our audience? And now in this day and age where we're working from home and working from Zoom or other types of platform, what technology do they have available to them? My husband is an instructional designer for a food company, and they have food plants all over the United States. The workers, while they have critical training needs, they can't step off the lines to go to do COVID training and things like that. So how do we bring the technology out to the people? What is their availability? What technology do they have? How quick do we need to get it out? Is it a COVID-19 training that we need to do immediately? Is it something that, we can, space out and do a different time? We really need to take that into consideration. And then how are we going to understand if it's successful? So a couple examples of what we've done here at Park University in this interesting time, as you all know, all higher ed institutions are having to pivot and to look at how, we're offering classes. And so, our faculty have been working with instructional designers and and other people to really create interactive synchronous and asynchronous learning. So some of it they do on Zoom, some of it is more, doing projects and things like that. But some of the things we've done from the workforce development side is we just recently hosted a session called Park U Leads, and it was 4 Friday mornings, and we used Zoom. There was pre-work that people came in and had the work done, and then we came into these very interactive sessions. And when we were setting it up, I thought, how is this ever going to work? But it was really cool because we were never in a large group for very long. We would come together for a large group to have projects, and then we would be in breakout rooms. The presenters used a lot of surveys and a lot of polls and things like that. So I encourage, as you're looking at creating training, making sure you understand the technology that you have, understanding how Zoom or Google Hangout or whatever you're using, use all of the functionality. Zoom just added some new features, so you can, not just raise your hands, but you can do thumbs up and you can clap and you can really have engaging interaction in Zoom. We did From the Schoolhouse to Their House, which is working with K through 12 teachers on how to create innovative classrooms for students and really supporting parents. And so we created all kinds of different sessions on, how to do a science unit from home, what tools you need, music, all of those kind of things. So you could really lay out training to make sure that you're hitting every need that you might have. Another thing that we do a lot at Park is look at gamification. How can we add gaming into our courses and into our trainings? And so one example is we, in our public administration program, they're using Minecraft. And as a mom of teenagers, again, I don't understand Minecraft, but our students love it. They go in and they're building their own cities. They're managing their own cities. They have all their own public administration buildings, all of that kind of stuff. So there's ways to bring in games into your teaching as well to make sure that it's innovative and engaging. And then the final initiative that we've done over this crazy time is something we call leadership conversations. And that's really speaking to the YouTube generation, where we are really doing these 60-second to 90-second snippets that then we're putting out on social media and YouTube. And we're just picking one topic, almost kind of like a TEDx kind of thing, and then blasting it out there for conversation. So there's a lot of different ways to get training and development out there. So just some quick tips and tricks before I pass it off to the next presenter. Really pay attention, keep it as fast paced. Don't do death by Zoom and death by PowerPoints. We've had to talk to faculty a lot about, being on Zoom in an hour and a half class is not the same as sitting in class and having these engaging one-on-one conversations. So that may not work for you. Include videos where it's appropriate, breakout sessions with interactive activities. I mentioned gamification. But then the other thing that we forget a lot of times is not everyone's using a computer with a camera on it. A lot of people are using their mobile phones or their iPads or something like that. And so keep that in mind as you're creating your training on how are different people going to view the training that you do. So with that, here's my contact information. I know the other presenters are going to go, and then we will answer any questions you have. But those are just some of the things that I've worked with our leaders on innovation over the last few months.
Great. Thank you, Katie. We really appreciate it. And like Katie said, we're going to take all the questions at the end, and we'll have some time for some interaction with the panelists. We're going to go ahead and move forward with Akish, who I think is back with us from the beginning. And she will share her screen. And Akish is with Johns Hopkins University and the Centers for Civic Impact. And so she is going to take it from here.
Okay, I just want to do a sound check and make sure everyone can hear me because I was having a bit of an issue getting off of mute before, so I'm here. Thank you so much, Katie, for going first. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. My name is Akis Forsyth, and I work for the Centers for Civic Impact Initiative at Johns Hopkins University. I've been teaching and coaching adults and those that think they're adults for about 13 years in multiple roles as a workforce development specialist, as a math teacher, and now as an instructional system specialist for a program that serves public sector employees like yourself seeking to improve data practices. So as a teacher, I've always been interested in how people learn and how they take in information, and I've noticed that teaching is not just a matter of telling or even showing. Although showing statistically is better, it's about understanding the learner and their needs and gaining their trust enough to get them to absorb the information that you're trying to give them. So anecdotally, as a first-year teacher, I work for a progressive school that allows us to be creative in our approach to teaching, which was perfect for me because my motto is whatever works, whether it's inside the box or out. And so the first day I wanted to do something that would catch their attention and allow them to understand my approach from the beginning, and I had it. So as the juniors approached the door to Algebra 2 in the early morning of the first day of school, I greeted them at the door, and I could see on their faces they were all curious as to what type of class this would be. And I found one of the more complex lessons in the course, and I took about 5 minutes to teach it. My goal was to get their reaction of having a test on the first day immediately after having learned something. So I warned them to take notes because it would soon matter, and I told them and showed them everything they needed to know about permutations and combinatorics. So I'm going to ask you now, how many of you know what that is? You can raise your hand, you can put something in the chat, whatever it is that you want to do. You can say yes, no. Have you ever heard of permutations and combinatorics? No. Right. So the main question that they ask in permutations is, does order matter? Which is the very question we're kind of searching for to make sense of what we're talking about today. So I asked for questions, but I didn't pause for any. I announced them to put all books and notes away and that they would be receiving their first graded quiz. And it was hard for me to hold back my laughter. I was delighted to see that some responded more verbally than others. And the most common reaction was, what do you mean? And I retorted, what do you mean? And they said, we just learned this. And I countered, but you did learn it nonetheless. And they tweaked, well, you just taught this. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, what is the difference? And I said to them, what is the difference between teaching and learning? And I encourage you all to think about this question now in your own context, and feel free to write your thoughts in the chat. And this is our driving question for today. So they continue. You cannot give a test on something that you just taught. And I said, why not? They said, I don't know, because we need time or something. And I said, okay, there it is. This is the point of the exercise. What else do you think you need? And they began spouting off answers. They said, I don't know, we need practice, we need more exercises, we need to make mistakes, we need feedback, we need more examples. And so after a while I asked, so learning just doesn't happen by listening. Unanimously they said no, right? We need X, Y, and Z. And so they went on to give me about 12 reasons why they were not ready for this graded test. And I call them the 12 stipulations for learning. And I encourage you to think about what those stipulations are or would be in your context, and what does it take for someone to know something? What has to happen in between the time that they are told and when they are considered learned? And so they went on to give me these 12 reasons, and I just want you to think about, again, what are those things that are in your context? And so to me, training is like a gentle breeze or a windstorm, depending on how it's delivered. Either way, it's like air, and it passes over us without us ever inhaling or making that air a part of us sometimes. It can go over our heads, brush past our faces, around our torso without ever entering our bodies. And so while we experience it, we don't absorb it, especially now during our current climate where everyone is wearing a metaphorical mask, which is virtual meetings. which means we filter what we take in even more, and it is that much easier to ignore the win. So in light of the pandemic, I wanted to exploit our current conditions just a little to explain the stipulations for training and actual true learning in a memorable way. I want to reiterate that every point I make is metaphorical and should not be taken as a way of dealing with COVID-19 in any way. So please continue to wear your mask and monitor what you inhale. With that being said, the goal for training is to get learners to inhale so that the topic and content become a part of them and the topics make them better, allowing them to go further. Just because the air is all around you doesn't mean you take it in. In the same way, just because we teach doesn't mean they learn. First, we get them to remove their mask, then inhale, then exhale. Removing the mask prepares the learner for receiving. Inhaling is the receiving, and exhaling is demonstrating what was received. So again, remove the mask, inhale, exhale. So before we move on, I'd like you to pick one part of the breathing process, take the mask off, inhale, exhale, and try to anticipate how it relates to training, right? I want you to try and anticipate what I mean by that component as it relates to training. What does removing the mask mean? What does inhaling mean? What does exhaling mean as far as training? And if you want to put your thoughts in chat, that's okay. You can go ahead. I'm going to continue moving through. So, step one, remove the mask. Nan-in, a Japanese master, received a university professor who came to inquire about Zen. Nan-in served him tea. He poured his visitor's cup full and then kept pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself, and he said, "It is full. No more will go in." Nan-in said, "Like this cup, you are full of your own speculations and opinions. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" You can't teach unless you're ready to receive. Or I should say, you can teach, but you can't learn until they are ready to receive. Just being present is no longer an indication of readiness or even attention in this virtual environment. Removing the mask relates to the task of getting learners to let their guard down and empty their cup, so to speak. So with that, it can be especially difficult to teach those whom you don't know, and vice versa, it can be difficult to learn from those you don't know. We take for granted that in an in-person experience, people see you completely. Your mannerisms, they see how you react to others, your body language, and in a virtual environment, they see close to nothing. Sidebar, we recently, JHU virtually hired a new admin assistant, and we didn't know that he was 6'5" until he came to pick up his device, which doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but it's good to know. But this is definitely an example of how you don't build those relationships or get to know people on a personal level virtually unless you deliberately do so. Therefore, we have to build relationships in other ways so that our audience connects and feels comfortable taking that information in. The CDC recommends that we wear a mask within 6 feet from those whom you do not know, those you don't reside with, and essentially those whom you're not familiar with. So in the same way, people wear masks to training, particularly given online. Most come to the training guarded. Most are simply Zoom fatigue, getting folks to turn on their cameras, introduce themselves, or complete a quick icebreaker quasi-related to the content can help loosen them up. A quick team building or relationship building exercise may be necessary, even online. Introduce yourself as well in not all professional facts. In addition, revealing your plan of attack by going over logistics, housekeeping, and agenda items will allow them to focus on the content without worrying about where you are at a given point. This way, they see the path you intend to take and opt to join you for the ride. Lastly, reveal the best way to learn in this educational experience. Do they need to take notes? How is the information structured? What should they expect? What are the assumptions? Unfortunately, the point of the mask is to filter kind of what comes in, and as humans, our brains have this same filtering mechanism. As trainers, we need to prove early that this information is important and connected to something they care about. Knowing your audience will allow you to create an introduction that captures their attention, and it must capture their attention quickly and relate it to something they already know. The next action is to get them to inhale. This is where the content starts to become a part of them. Trainers do this by activating prior knowledge, adjusting schema, or increasing awareness of metacognition. When we activate prior knowledge, we tell people where this new information should be stored in their current knowledge model and how it fits with what they already know. We do this by relating the new information to something they may already be familiar with via stories and metaphors. Symbolically, removing the mask allows learners to be ready to receive what you have for them. It opens them up, and once they're open and willing to receive, it's imperative to ask them why they're here, what they hope to learn from the session. This centers them to the content at hand and increases metacognition. Next, you want to assess their current knowledge level by evaluating skills. This creates dissonance in them and allows you to see the knowledge gap. So for them, it signifies a need for something that you have. Pre-tests also allow learners access to the content so that when you teach it later, it's the second time that they've heard it and not necessarily the first, which means it moves closer to consolidation and long-term memory. Number 3, you want to leverage the power of story to reveal the possibilities of this new skill or knowledge. With that being said, I'm going to pause for about 10 seconds to let you read this quote. Stories and metaphors can help us build on this process by encouraging us to use our brains differently, sometimes unconventionally, and connecting it with seemingly unconnected things. They've shown that our brains react differently and more positively to stories than to bulleted lists of items and series of data points. Many more parts of our brain are active when we're engaged in a narrative, so stories increase empathy, understanding, recall. It's also a great way to get listeners to relate to a topic. The last thing that you want to do is convey actionable or performance-based steps, measurable tasks that you can easily tell are or are not being completed or adjusted. And this is how you want to relay the information in codified steps. The third step and the last step is exhale. While inhaling is a way for learners to take in information, exhaling allows learners to express what they know or have learned. Exhaling can be done by enabling learners to practice a new skill, share experiences, or exchange information. And it enables trainers to see what's landing and redirect if necessary. Just because it was taught doesn't mean it was learned applies to any attempted knowledge transfer. Knowledge management theory tells us that there are 2 main types of knowledge, explicit and tacit. Explicit knowledge is easily transferable. Codified knowledge is easy to articulate, write, and therefore share. And it's also fairly simple to assess because it's repeatable, sometimes without comprehension. Tacit knowledge, on the other hand, is gained from experience and context, and it is more difficult to write down, capture, and present in a tangible way. So knowledge adjustment and transfer comes from interaction with other people's perspectives and ideas. It comes from community. The difference between what is taught and what is actually learned depends on the type of knowledge you're attempting to transfer. So what people get from what you say depends on a lot of things. It depends on experience, expectation, assumptions, prior knowledge, feelings, and many other things that just cannot be predicted. The exhale part of the process allows you to see what they receive so that you can reinforce some things and clarify others. So in class, I would call this the you do or the misconception catcher. Similar to a dream catcher or mask, it filters out the misconceptions and consolidates the intended information. Now that I've taught, let's figure out all the ways you've misheard me, so to speak, or let's make sure that you caught what I was throwing out. To get learners to show what they know, we can assess them, we can provide practice and feedback, or permit sharing and collaboration, or have some type of application of learning. This action consists of both an assessment of and an assessment for learning, which asks learners about the instructional strategy or facilitation technique that was chosen. So in conclusion, by breaking the ice and getting students to let their guard down, they're ready to learn because they know how the information connects and relates to them, but still needs facilitators to tell them the what and the how. Steps should be clear, performance-based, actionable, and after you've taught, then assess whether learning took place by requesting them to just demonstrate something. Too many training sessions are just show and tell, with no involvement from the audience to help steer the learning process. Usually modules are canned and pre-made with little wiggle room for in-the-moment contributions. This thwarts your ability to make a real connection with learners. So with the assumption that training is mostly provided during synchronous sessions with PowerPoint decks, I heard my colleagues say death by PowerPoint, power. Here are a few additional tips for PowerPoint decks. First of all, make sure that your images match exactly what you're talking about, right? There must be a visual match. It should add to the message without distraction. Move beyond bullets. Text needs pictures too. So I'm speaking of diagrams. Feel free to use diagrams as an image for text so that they see the connection and meaning behind the words. Remember that a PowerPoint is for them, not you. So you need to ensure that speaker notes stay off the slides and in the notes section. So figure out how you will capture your notes, but they should not be on the slide. The fourth thing is keep it simple, Philly. One idea per slide. Make sure that you don't try to cram too much in one slide. Separate information if you can. Remember that people can't read and listen at the same time. So if you do have a lot of text or a complex diagram or a chart, give people time to take it in so that they can inhale, so that when you start talking, they understand the connection between what you're saying and they're actually listening and not reading. The last thing is I encourage everyone to study perception science, and there are many things to learn about how people learn and take in information. Contrary to popular belief, people don't read a slide from left to right, top to bottom. They actually read what sticks out first, and they only take in a few pieces of information at once. So study what's called the Gestalt principles for presenting data and other information. So in many cases, the techniques you use in person should also be used online. In conclusion, get to know who's in the room, lead with a story, don't take a chance that they received what you taught, evaluate it, and you will have created a learning experience and not necessarily a teaching experience. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm glad to answer any questions you have at the end.
Great, thank you, Akish. That was awesome as well. All right, our final presenter that we have is Perry Sampson from the University of Michigan, and he is going to take it away from here. And then once he is done, like I mentioned earlier, please put any questions in the chat that you have, and we'll save those for the end, and then we'll also have the opportunity to ask questions directly at the end.
Thank you, Amanda. I regret now coming after Katie and Akish because I think they've done a fine job of identifying ways to teach that are meaningful. And the key points I think you've heard are that it's not about the presentation, it's more about the reception, how the learner hears it and how the learner consumes the information that you're presenting. My story is I'm a professor at the University of Michigan. I teach climate science there, and this is the start of my 42nd year on the faculty. And so you might think I know something about teaching, but after hearing these talks, I'm very nervous about showing my slides, given the last slide that Akish just showed, because I fear I'm about to get graded down here. I'm okay with that. I still get paid tomorrow, so fine. I'd like to talk about the fact that we are thinking about online learning. And, you know, Katie and Akish just sort of knocked it out of the park with their presentations. And yet I bet that there are some of you who are doing email or doing other things, thinking you could listen at the same time as you were hearing these presentations, that you could be doing email or whatever. In my own class last year, and this is information from a system that I will talk about, I'm able to measure how much students participate. And so you can see in January and February, the first two sets, students in 2019 and 2020 were participating in the average number of questions answered per month, about the same, January and February. And I tell the same jokes every year and the same questions every year, so it's not surprising. But then, you know, around the end of February, early March, the COVID happened, and suddenly students were sent away. Now they're suddenly going to be watching online somewhere else. And I can see here the orange bar, the dark orange bar from winter of 2020. Perhaps you can see that there's a drop then in the number of questions being answered. There's a drop off in the participation level of students after they were sent to and weren't able to come to the classroom. And I should explain the way I've been teaching now for many years is my classes both in person and streamed online, and students daily can decide whether they come to class physically or participate from away. I'm going to show you a lot of tools I use to allow the students to interact with me during class time. Nonetheless, there is something about the online experience for learning that is not the same as the more immersive situation for the face-to-face class. And more than that, I'm able to look at information about because I can measure whether they're physically in the room or watching from away every day. I keep track of then who's coming to class, who's not. And from previous semesters, I can show that in my class, this is still an introductory course for students who are not majors. So they all are fairly scared out of their minds about taking a science course. That if you came to my class, physically came to my class 75% of the time, you got an average grade of somewhere like maybe it's 84% on average. If you came to my class physically less than 25% of the time, your average grade is lower, somewhere below 70%. So something happens here in this online situation. You're going to have this, you're all, as I understand it, trainers, and you're going to have people watching you online, and there are going to be, as you can go out there and stand on your head and give the most excellent presentation about whatever content you're trying to train, it doesn't matter. Students are going to feel like, or maybe you're explaining it so well that they think they understand it and can go do other things. The reality is they can't. On the right slide here, it shows, because I can measure with the technologies I've built, I can measure what I call slide views. So basically, there might be 30 slides in my presentation, and I can measure how many of those slides students actually viewed during class. And this shows again that if you physically come to class, you're far more likely to be watching the slides. If you don't, if you don't come to, what happened there? If you don't come to class, you participate at a lower level. Likewise, I do a lot of activities during class to see, as Keisha I think mentioned, is the capacity for metacognition. Do students understand what they don't understand? And in your training, you want to do that. You want the student to have the opportunity to discover for themselves that I don't understand this. And that's very important. The point at which it's not you teaching, but it's them deciding to learn, is a transition that you want to try to move towards. How do you force them to learn the material? How do they volunteer to learn the material? And there's something about that online world. In my case, my refrigerator knows my name. I sort of got, and it says, "Oh, you haven't eaten all the pickles yet." So whatever. For whatever reason, I'm going to be distracted by the capacity for food to be available somewhere. Students are the same way. Whoever you're training are going to be the same way. So I'm trying to boil down my few hints for you in this slide. First of all, set expectations that you're going to participate. And in my case, I make it worth points. If I think it's important that they participate, if I think it's important they answer questions during the session, I give points for that. Now, I'm not sure you can do that if you need to do that in your training, but certainly think about, how do you incentivize the fact that if you're going to ask a question, it's probably for a good reason, they should probably try to answer it. So if there's some way to incentivize that, do it. And then reward them for participating. In my case, I'm going to show them questions and they're going to try to respond. I want to then be able to address their answers and talk about why they got it wrong, or tell them why they got it right for the wrong reason. And I'll show you how I do that. And you want to encourage everyone to participate in the discussion. It's far too easy for some just to hide behind the screen now and not really engage in questions and discussion during class. I will argue that you want them all to feel comfortable being able to participate in the discussion. And also, as both speakers have said, you want to be able to monitor. It's not enough just to present the material and then hope you got lucky. It's kind of like the way I bowl. I just throw the ball and maybe it'll go in the right direction. But you want to then monitor, did they actually understand it? And there are ways to do that. So let me show you some of the tricks that I do. First of all, you're all going to have some kind of goal that you want the participants to demonstrate an understanding of something. And your fill in the blank there is going to be different than mine. I teach a course called Extreme Weather, among others. And so I might want them to understand how atmospheric stability happens. What does it take to create a tornado? In any case, you're going to make a presentation, and there are parts to your presentation that have been alluded to already today. One of them is formative assessment, it's called in general. And so you're going to have discussion. Some of it's going to be active, where students are going to be engaged in discussion. You can use breakout sessions, for example, in Zoom to do some kind of discussion. But understand that the value of that discussion is that many will participate. And even those who aren't offering their voice are seeing the discussion, and often that encourages more discussion. So you want to figure out ways to encourage that conversation to happen. You want to give them some, quizzes. I mean, here in Zoom, there's ways to ask at least multiple choice questions, which is a nice start. So give them the chance to demonstrate their answers. You don't have to show their names of the answers, just give them the chance to see if they understand what you're talking about. Maybe you've got some homework or after activity you're going to do. Maybe you have other supporting things to do. And ultimately, at least in my world, not only do we do that, but we're going to actually go to some kind of summative assessment. I give exams or reports, some way that you're going to show me you actually understood and learned what I talked about. In your environment, maybe that's going to happen, maybe not. But it's helpful for the student. In fact, one argues that the best design you can have for your course is think about how to make the best summative assessment. How do you allow the student to understand what they don't understand? All these are methods for doing that. And there are a lot of tools out there. Each of them has their various pluses. Zoom, for example, we're using right now. The tool I'm going to talk about is Echo 360. I like to tinker. I like to build things for the internet. You probably don't know that, but I created a website back in the 90s called the Weather Underground, which is weather on the internet. And people have apps on your phone, perhaps, that came from that. Largely done because I wanted my students to be able to access weather information for class. And it grew to have like 17 million visitors a day. More recently, I've helped create a tool called Echo 360. And it's kind of like Zoom. It allows me to broadcast live and records what I'm doing from my home now to students wherever they are. And it allows me to do that for large classes. So here's the kinds of things I can do during class. As an example, not that you need to do this in your own situation, but my goal here is to help the students understand what they don't understand. So, when does the temperature hit its peak for the day? And in this tool, the students can answer this multiple choice question, A, B, C, D, E, and you can see how many have answered it for each one. But more than that, I can then click a button and they have to justify why they chose the answer that they did. So I might go click on the 12 o'clock and it'll show me that their justifications for choosing 12 o'clock, and there are no names attached, which is important because now I can talk about some of the rationale they had. Why is it accurate? Why is it inaccurate? I can make fun of them because their answer is really stupid and they need some coffee or something. There are no names here, so it's a little bit of banter going back and forth, but it's a chance for me to demonstrate I'm a vending machine, really. And the students are, basically putting their coins in, they're answering the question. And now they want something back. They want to know if they got it right or not and why they got it right or wrong. Another kind of question I can do, and Amanda will appreciate this as she's a former student in my department, I ask them questions about an image. So in this case, this is an image of infrared radiation. And this is after lecturing to them about infrared radiation. What part of this image does not make sense to you and why? So the students then can put a dot on the spot they think does not make sense and tell me why they don't. And so here's this is for my class. You can see, gosh, this kid just needs to wake up, but it's all over the place here. And I can go click at any one of these dots and see why they chose that particular spot. And now it's more, the class is no longer me just simply lecturing. The class is participation, and students are engaging and thinking about the material, and they are offering their feedback here. And frankly, this changes the nature of my class from being didactic to being a very interactive and feedback oriented class, where I can literally go from dot to dot here and talk about their answers and talk about whether it's a good answer or a bad answer. And I can do open-ended questions, and then again, there's no name, so I can talk about, if I ask this question on the exam here, you know, this would get maybe 7 points, and here's why I would mark it down. So this is that kind of formative assessment, helping your learner understand what they haven't learned. And then in my system, students can pose questions, this Echo 360 system. You can do that in Zoom as well, as you are not doing now, but you can ask questions in this system. And what happens is the questions are streaming over here on the right side. The students can ask the questions anonymously. That's going to be very important in my class, at least. So in a study I've done recently, I asked the students at the beginning of the semester, how comfortable, when I have questions, I am comfortable asking them verbally during class. Now think for yourself how you might answer this question. And you can see what's happened here. And this is over multiple semesters, that the females in the class, this is a science class in which the females are a small portion of the class, like 66% are male, 33% are female. And they just don't feel as welcome, I think, in the class. And the same is true for first generation students, for students of color, for whatever. If you are a cohort in the class and you're not feeling like you are as learned, or you don't feel like you belong as much as somebody else in the class, you're going to be less comfortable, as shown here for the women in the class. So what we did is we created that button so students could pose questions and pose them anonymously. And the next thing that happened was, first of all, the number of questions I got rose dramatically. For every year, I've always gone, any questions? And if you want a moment of silence, that's a great way to do it, because nothing happens. Students don't. I mean, you might get, like, over the course of the semester, I might get like a dozen questions over the course of the whole semester, usually from some guys in the front row. But for the most part, I was getting no questions. And now with this, with anonymous questions, 549 questions. I mean, this it's sobering to know how confusing I've been all these years and didn't know it. But if students have a way to ask questions anonymously, suddenly everyone can ask a question fearlessly, and you can ask and you're going to get some dumb questions. It's okay. You just want them to ask the questions when they have them during class. And you can see that, like, almost half the students are asking questions. I mean, how many situations are you in where, maybe in this case where you're doing training, it might be your population is more confident and will ask the questions. If you're in but I'm going to guarantee there are always going to be people in your group who are less confident and fearful of looking stupid by asking a dumb question. There's some value there in asking the anonymous question. And by the way, when you do that, now the women students are asking at least as many questions as the male students. Same for first generation, same for students from English as not their native language. So this is the kind of thing to think about in terms of inclusivity. You want everyone to feel comfortable participating. They may not still, but you want them to feel like they have a way to do that. And I would argue that is a valuable, in my case, I am trying to attract more students into the sciences. And if you don't feel like you belong, you're going to drop out after one semester. I'm trying to find ways that you're going to want to participate and keep going so we don't lose these students. So go back to my list. Set the expectations. Reward them for participating somehow by at least giving them, talking about their answers. Encourage discussion by all, because you want everyone to feel at least comfortable participating, and when they're confused, being able to ask the question. And monitor the misunderstandings. I've not shown you this, but I can monitor, how many slides they viewed. I can monitor how many questions they've asked, how many times they answered my questions, how many slides they looked at. I'm going to start creeping you out here, but you can do this with technology online, actually probably easier than you can in the classroom. And so with that information, I'm able to predict by the end of the second week of classes who's going to fail my course with 80% accuracy based on their level of participation in class. These are my musings about what we can do on the online environment to teach class. And I'm open to questions here now, and I think we're going to open it up for everyone in the questions here. But and by the way, just as sort of a Easter egg in the whole thing, in the question window, I'm going to share with everybody a little video here that if you know Amanda, you might enjoy watching at your leisure.
How did I know that was going to come back to bite me 20 years later? Here we are. Okay, so thank you. First of all, a huge thank you to Katie, to Akish, and to Perry for sharing with us their information today. Very much appreciate the perspective, and as we all move to training and education and delivering online learning for our staff and for our folks that we're trying to engage in our programs, it's a really important thing to think about all of this instead of just scheduling the Zoom call, instead of just, so we're talking about different platforms that are available, and we've had some conversations regionally about things like learning management systems and the tools that that all of our panelists mentioned, and the additional ability that you get from actually using technology. And so I know there's a huge emphasis on being in the classroom and that face-to-face interaction, but I think it's also important to acknowledge the value that these online tools provide. And whether you're using them in an interactive setting with people in the classroom or it's a fully remote setting, there are a lot of opportunities with technology and innovation that have come about that are really valuable tools to use. And so we've got some questions in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and read some of them. We've got a question from Molly. How did you know where to start when deciding what data to collect and compare for this type of information that you wanted to learn about your classes? And so I'm going to direct that one actually to Perry to start, and then Akish, we might jump to you after that.
Oh, I didn't know what to start collecting, so I'm a meteorologist, so we put thermometers out, and we just put thermometers in everybody's backyard, and because we know more data is better. So I just started collecting anything I could about student behaviors to try to see which ones are the most important. And I will tell you, without, as you might guess, actually, that if you can measure whether students are getting your questions right during the presentations, that formative assessment part where you pose questions, and if students aren't getting it right then, they tend to not learn it later, at least in the students in my class. So if I just keep track of, are they getting the questions right in those first 2 or 3 weeks, these formative assessment questions, and I compile that, then the system, it lets me do that, that I can pretty well predict that this is a student who's, if you got it right, you're probably gonna get it right on the exams. If you didn't get it right, there's a chance that you're just not going to learn it. So those are the ones I focus on and can reach out to.
Great. And Akish,
For me,
yeah.
Thank you. For me, because I teach adult learners, I think our questions are more centered around, was this information relevant? Was it helpful? Did you feel like you had an opportunity to collaborate and learn from others? And I think those are some of the key pieces that we want to keep in place. So I mentioned a little bit about evaluating, whether it's an evaluation of their learning or an evaluation for their learning. The difference between the two is one is asking questions about the content and the other is asking questions about the delivery of that content. And I think both of them are equally as important. And so you want to make sure that you're gathering data about their experience in the learning process. Like Perry said, but you're also gathering information, formative, summative, assessment based. And so some of the things I asked is, you know, did you have an opportunity to learn? Do you feel like you learned? Do you feel like you had an opportunity to collaborate or share? Do you feel like you received something that is directly applicable to your work? If so, what are those things? So questions related to that.
Great, thank you. And Molly, did that? Okay, good. We got that question answered. So we have another question in the chat from Lauren, talking about, we use Zoom heavily because of breakout rooms, but that does not allow anonymous questions. And so what suggestions do you have for how we can promote inclusivity and create a safe space for questions? And I'm actually gonna pose that to all three of you because I think there's different approaches here, but let's start with Katie.
Yeah, great. So there's several things you can do. You can remind the learners to send messages just directly to the host. And then while it's not anonymous, at least their name is not out there for everyone. So you can say, you know, a question that's come up is, you know, about this topic, and you can answer it like that. I like to do a lot of check-in with learning, kind of as Akish just mentioned. And then another thing is, you know, when it's a really difficult topic, what I will do is break them out even in just partners into the breakout room. So you have a lot of different partners, and especially if it's a group that works together a lot, partner people that already have a strong relationship and connection, so they can really talk, you know, vulnerably and open of, I didn't really understand this. Did you? And if you can really partner people up with different styles or different connections, then you might be able to open them up as well. You know, it is challenging on Zoom, but there are a few ways that you can do that effectively.
Thank you. Let's go to Perry next.
Oh, I think Katie just answered it quite well. I don't use Zoom myself, but that seems like a good workaround.
Great. Akish, I know you guys use Zoom with Center Specific Impact, so do you have some suggestions?
Absolutely. We actually use 2 other platforms that we incorporate with Zoom that I think incorporate actually well. We use something called Poll Everywhere, and this is a place where they would have to go to another tab or to a web browser to answer your question, but it does maintain that anonymity that we're looking for in questions. You can make it so they can post questions or they can post comments where their names are not actually there, and you can embed those answers or results directly in your PowerPoint slides or your deck so that you see those answers pop up in real time, and they're able to put their answers in on the phone, on a smartphone, or they can actually go to another tab. We also use Nearpod, which is another way to kind of allow people to see your content. We use this particularly for our federal workers because they were not able to access Zoom. And so they would call in, and then we would host the entire deck and presentation on Nearpod. And that way everybody can go to one place. And there you get them to post questions, you get them to post answers, and you can hide people's names. You can also do formative and summative assessments there as well. And Katie mentioned one other thing, which is like one-on-one sessions where you meet with people one-on-one. While that's not anonymous, it does give them that sense of connection with you, so that when they are in a group, they feel more comfortable stating their answers or stating their choices because they've met you, they've become familiar, and you've built that relationship.
Great, thank you. All right, we've got one last question in the chat, and I'm going to ask all three of you in quick succession because we've got about 2 minutes left on the call. We've got a question. Someone mentioned YouTube. Are there any other social media channels that you find useful for engaging with students? And let's go the other direction. Akish, do you want to start?
So I don't necessarily use any other social media platforms. When I was teaching in K through 12, they used a lot of different things like Schoology, Edutopia, I think it's called, and those types of things. So I think those things can definitely be incorporated in this sense, and they give you the opportunity to create a group or a district or a department or some type of thing for yourself, and you don't necessarily have to allow the entire public in.
Thank you. Perry, anything to add for that? Social media channels?
Yeah, I've got actually something I can show you right now quickly here. I'm always building new stuff, and here's one where you know that students heard the video and they can't remember exactly the tool, the thing you're talking about, but they remember something about it. So we built a tool that listens to the videos and interprets then using artificial intelligence what was being talked about in each of the videos, so that students can now search the videos. And if you had a whole bunch of training videos, for example, be able to search through them all. So here's a case where this is for a Stats 2 stats course at Michigan. And the student could only remember that they mentioned pumpkin. So put in pumpkin and it searches through the videos and it finds the place where the instructor talked about pumpkins. And from that, then they can click on this and it takes them that spot.
And we need to decide where this pumpkin comes from.
In the videos. So the whole idea here is to help students be able to find information when they want to find information. And the ability to search videos from a class or from other tools is going to be important in the future.
Great. That's super cool. And Katie, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just put it in chat because I know we're running quick on time. But we use our LMS for internal people. I will say for external, I live and die on LinkedIn. I love it because you can create private groups. And so the ParkU leads that we just did, the conversation was so good, we pushed it over to LinkedIn to continue that private conversation.
Great, thank you. All right, we are right at 2:30/3:30 for our East Coast folks. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everybody who was able to attend today. You guys make sure to check the chat before you log off because you're getting a lot of thanks in the chat from the participants. And if anyone has ideas for future regional innovation forums, I'm all ears. After this, I will send an email out with the contact information for Akish and Perry and Katie. If anybody has questions or want to follow up individually on stuff, I will send that out shortly after. But thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you found it useful. It seems like everybody did. And thank you again to our panelists.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.